Hi all, my name is Susan Yeates and I'm an artist and author of a couple of books with Search Press, Sketchbook Challenge, 100 Prompts for Daily Drawing and Beginner's Guide to Lino Cut. And I'm taking part today in the colour wheel relay with Search Press, whereby 6 of their authors are taking part and each one is going to be inspired by another one's book. So I have been tasked with looking at some of Tim Fisher's book, and I decided to pick this book, Beginner's Guide to Painting with Oil Pastels, because oil pastels are not something I use very often, and I thought this would be a great way to have an exploration into using oil pastels for some painting. So I've got a copy of the book here on my iPad. I'm going to be looking through, I'm going to be learning, reading, experimenting, and then having a go at creating my own piece of art based upon something that I take from this particular book. This particular book is part of the series that I took part in. This is Beginner's Guide to Oil Pastels and my one was Beginner's Guide to Lino Cut. So it will be produced in a lovely way that Search Press produces their books, with wonderful explanations, brilliant pictures, and I can't wait to get stuck in. So I'm going to do a little bit of reading and I'll join you again in a moment. Okay, so the project within the book I've decided to work with is this Norfolk Lane Trees and Foliage. I love working on painting and drawing landscapes, so this seemed an ideal one for me to do. In this particular project, he recommends using a wooden board, so the surface used here is a hardwood plywood panel. I don't have that to hand because I primarily work in sketchbooks, but the idea of having this medium toned background to work with is great. So what I'm going to do is just vary this slightly and paint myself a background using gesso and ink and work with the oil pastels onto the back of this. So I've just got some clear gesso, I've got some thick paper, so a big sketchbook, an A4 piece of sketchbook. It's actually an oil paper for oil painting, but it doesn't really matter, it's any kind of thick paper. I'm just going to mix a little bit of brown ink into the gesso with a big paintbrush, and I'm just going to coat, try not to spill that everywhere, I'm just going to coat the board with this background colour. I love doing this because it kind of starts you off. It ruins the page in a way. It gives you a mid-tone to work from so you can show up your lights and your darks, and it gets rid of that fear of the blank page because I've now got something there, and just wipe in a few strokes back and forth on the page is easy. It's relaxing. It's almost like a little warm-up before you get started. But when doing landscapes, I do love to have a coloured mid-tone background, whether it's a grey or a brown, this sort of sepia or umber or raw sienna colour. Anything like that is great to go. So it's kind of like creating a board coloured background. So I'm deviating from the project in the book, but the aim is to be inspired by it rather than copy it directly. So I'm going to leave this to dry. That's my background done. Just a big thick brush, bit of clear gesso and some brown ink. I'll let that dry and then we'll get going with our painting. Okay, so my background is now dry, and whilst that was drying, I've gone through my inspiration folder on my iPad to look for some photos of a landscape to use as a reference. So I've put away the book and I have out a reference to use, but I've read the instructions so I know what I'm doing in theory. Now the first stage was to draw with a dip pen and ink out your, sort of mark out your drawing. So what I'm going to do just to vary this is just use a pencil because it's convenient and it is to hand. So I'm just going to, using this as inspiration, I'm not using it as, I'm not going to do this exactly as it is, but I'm using it as inspiration. I'm going to mark in some of the major sort of points in the landscape. I always love including quite a lot of sky and clouds in my paintings and drawings. So one thing I am going to do is sort of roughly mark the big cloud shapes out. I chose this picture mostly because I really enjoyed the massive cloud formations. So this is going to be a large feature of this particular painting. I also really enjoyed this perspective of this roadway here, this pathway running through. So I just want to sort of mark this out in pencil. I'm just using a very loose grip. I am using a mechanical pencil just because it happened to be the nearest pencil to me as I went to grab a pencil to draw with. That I'm just getting these basic shapes of the tree line in. I'm going to ignore the horse for now. I might decide to pop him in, but he's quite tiny, so he may not go in. So I've got these basic sort of trees. I'm going to mark in some of the other sort of bush shapes, because there's some really sort of wonderful bush shapes I want to just, you know, get a little bit of an impression in. As I said, I tend to use photos as inspiration. I draw upon them, so I'm not going for a photorealistic finish, but I do like to pull out elements of a reference photo that I really like and am inspired by. I quite enjoy these sort of shadows coming across, so those shadows are something I want to sort of look at. Let's get that sort of pathway and bush formations. So it looks like a bunch of scribbles for now, which fine, not a problem. And we do have this rather big tree, which is going to be sort of coming up through here. Okay, so that is some of the major shapes marked in just with a pencil. It's very fine, so it may not show particularly well on the screen. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just start to use the white oil pastel to mark in and fill out where these clouds are. I like the fact that when we use the oil pastels, we're going to have a lot of the background showing through, which will give some sort of warmth behind the painting. So I'm just working into these cloud shapes, marking these out first. And if I was painting in, I often use acrylic paints, is something I sort of use slightly more than oil pastels. This is almost exactly the process that I would do, just using acrylic paint, not oil pastel, so very similar process. Okay, so I'm going to crack on with this for a bit and I'll rejoin you in a moment once I have got my white on. Okay, the white is now on the painting and I'm now going in with a grey pastel to now pick out those dark shadows within the clouds. And I'm using a mixture of the side of the oil pastel and also the top of the oil pastel to give a different effect. I'm trying to pick out the major sort of formations in the grey in the clouds at the moment, these dark shadows underneath, because the sun is shining from the top, so we have the darkest shadows underneath. So it's going to be a little bit of blending, scribbling, and sort of working over that white background that was there. So I'm going to continue on and I'll rejoin you in a minute. Okay, so I started to blend the sort of white of the clouds and the grey of the clouds. I've got a couple of different tones of grey starting to come together. It's a little bit like the messy middle, but I'm going to start to bring in the blue in the sky just to bring the clouds forward. So I've got several different blues here. I'm going to have a go at sort of blending all of these together in some sort of way just to give that impression of the sky behind. So I'm going to add the blue on and then I'll be back with you. Okay, so far I've been mostly working up the sky area, playing with mixing blues, whites, greys to generate that really moody sky that is there. But I'm now just going to start gradually working some colour into this bottom section using a mixture of greens, and I'm trying to sort of pull out the lights and darks that I see, the different areas of colour, and I'm definitely sort of working the oil pastels in my own sweet way, which is part of this exercise, is everyone doing things in their own way and their own style. So I'm going to now sort of build up layers of oil pastel in this bottom section now, looking at that really dark tree line, a sort of brighter grass colour, and as I said, I'm not going for realism. I'm not necessarily looking at this picture in front of me as a real, I'm putting my own colours, my own spin on it, and just playing with these layers of colour, and I'm really having quite a wonderful, fabulous time. So I'm going to crack on and I'll join you again in a second. Okay, so I've been working away here, having a lovely time. Time seems to have stopped still, to be honest, as I've been doing this, and I've just been playing. Oil pastel is not necessarily a medium I use very often. I tend to use sketching and drawing tools, or acrylic paint if I was doing something like this, but it's been a really fun exercise in experimenting with something that that I've learnt through Tim Fisher's book All About Oil Pastels. So it is by no means the exact method that he has taught in the book, but I've had a really fun time having a go with this, making a lot of mess, as you can see. And this is my finished piece inspired by this photo here, but essentially this is inspired by Tim Fisher's book All About Oil Pastels. So I hope you found that interesting.